Mrs. Orvin had managed the dining floor at Hartwell House for 23 years, and she had learned early in the first of them that the rooms most dangerous to underestimate were the ones that looked perfectly still. The annual Hartwell dinner was the finest evening on the house calendar. 8 courses, 40 covers, a wine list selected 3 months in advance. Every seat at the long mahogany table had been earned by someone by a long loyalty, a useful silence, or a careful debt, and every person in the room understood without being told that the man at its head had made them all. Domenico Var arrived at 7:30, as he always did, without announcement. The room did not need one. Conversations shortened. Chairs straightened. The sommelier at the serving board touched his lapel without thinking. Mrs. Orvin, who had watched this happen 11 times across 11 dinners, still found it remarkable, the way a room could reorganize itself around a single man's presence without a word spoken, and without a single soul admitting it was happening. Var himself gave no sign of noticing. He moved to his chair with the unhurried ease of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by the effect he had on rooms, shook 2 hands along the way with the brief, particular warmth he reserved for people he actually respected, and settled. His coat was charcoal. His tie was dark. His face was composed in the way of a man who had learned, across many years and many rooms, that stillness was its own authority. To his left, managing the small theater of table arrangements with practiced fluency, was Castle. 6 years as Var's personal assistant had given him a particular confidence. The confidence of a man who had stood close to power long enough to mistake proximity for a share of it. He moved between the sideboard and the table with the assurance of someone who knew exactly where every bottle was placed and why, who had approved the seating and the menu and the order of service, and who considered the evening. In some private way, he had never been asked to examine his. Mrs. Orvin watched him the way she watched everything at Hartwell House, steadily, without comment, filing it away. She was less certain about the new wine steward. Ilva had been on staff for 3 weeks. She was quiet in the particular way that is different from shyness, not retreating from the room but simply not requiring it. She moved through the service corridor without the small performances that newer staff often fell into, the slightly elevated posture, the meaningful look, the studied efficiency meant to be noticed. Ilva was efficient without performing it. She knew the cellar layout already, could recite the evening's flight from memory, and had not once in 3 weeks asked Mrs. Orvin to repeat an instruction. She was the kind of person a busy room looks straight through, which, in Mrs. Orvin's experience, was either a liability or a gift, depending on the person. The first 3 courses passed without incident. The room found its warmth, the particular warmth of people who have eaten well and drunk well in a room where the stakes have been, for one evening, set aside. Var spoke little, as he always did, but listened in the way of a man whose attention, when you had it, felt like a considerable thing. Mrs. Orvin kept half her attention on the table and half on the service board, which was where she always kept it, and noted the first pour of the evening's principal red, a Burgundy from the reserve rack, chosen by Ilva 2 days prior and approved without comment by the sommelier. It was during the 4th course that she saw it. Not the act itself, she caught only the tail end, which was enough. Castle, moving between the sideboard and the table with his usual confident ease, paused at the serving board for slightly longer than the task required. His right hand went to the decanter that had been set for the table's principal service, Var's decanter, the one Ilva had already drawn and decanted that afternoon, and came away again in the space of 2 seconds, smooth and unhurried, the motion folded inside a larger adjustment to the glassware. Mrs. Orvin's eyes were sharp enough to catch the slight difference in how his hand moved versus how it looked. She had spent 23 years reading rooms. She knew when a hand was doing one thing and pretending to do another. She did not move immediately. She stood at her station, kept her face arranged in its usual steady attention, and watched Castle continue to the table with the seating card he had ostensibly gone to retrieve. She became aware, then, that she was not the only one who had seen. Ilva was at the reserve rack. She had been there since before Castle crossed to the sideboard, pulling a secondary bottle for the east end of the table, her back partially to the room, and she was standing very still, not frozen, still in the particular way of a person who has just finished thinking and decided. Her eyes were on the decanter. Then they moved to Mrs. Orving, just briefly, a quick clean glance with no theater in it, and then she looked back at the decanter and did not look away again. Mrs. Orving gave the smallest possible nod. What happened in the next 4 minutes was this. Ilva crossed to the serving board at the natural moment of the next course's preparation, lifted the decanter in the ordinary course of arranging the service station, and set it aside behind the rack, behind 2 other bottles, where it would not be reached again without intention. From the reserve she drew a second decanter of the same burgundy, identical to the eye at table distance, already opened and breathing from the afternoon's preparation. She checked the label against the card on the board, as she always did, and set it in the place the first had occupied. Then she continued to the east end of the table with the secondary bottle she had originally come to retrieve, and she poured it without a tremor in her hand or a change in her expression. The first toast of the evening used the second decanter. Mrs. Orving received the folded card during the brief interval between the 5th and 6th courses, when Ilva passed behind her to the service corridor. It was a small card from the floor station's own supply, the kind used for table notes and corrections. 4 words, written in a clear and unhurried hand: first decanter, reserve rack. Mrs. Orving read it once, put it in her left breast pocket, and excused herself. She did not go to VAR directly. She went to the man she always went to when she needed something handled without the room knowing it was being handled. His head of household staff, who had served the family for longer than she had worked at Hartwell House, and who listened to her 3 sentences in the corridor outside the kitchen with his eyes on the floor, and then looked up and said, "Stay on the floor, I'll manage from here." She went back to the floor. The 6th course was served without incident, and the 7th, and the 8th. Castle moved through the evening with his usual practiced ease, and if he checked the service board once during the dessert course, a glance that lasted a half-second too long, Mrs. Orving was the only person in the room who marked it. She did not know, until the following morning, exactly what had been found in the first decanter. What she knew that night: the toast was poured from clean crystal, the dinner concluded in good order, and Domenico VAR left Hartwell House the same way he had arrived, without announcement, without ceremony, and without any visible knowledge that the evening had been anything other than what it appeared. Castle's access was suspended before the cars had cleared the drive. Mrs. Orving learned this from the head of household the following morning, in the same even tone he used for everything. She did not ask him to elaborate. She had been in service long enough to understand that some things were resolved in rooms she would never see, and that the important thing, the only thing in the end, was that they were. She was in the service corridor at 9:30, reviewing the inventory from the previous evening, when she heard the door. Not the main door, the staff entrance, the narrow one at the corridor's far end, the one that opened from the east garden and that she had never, in 23 years, seen a guest use voluntarily. She turned. Domenico VAR came through it alone. No aide, no driver waiting inside the door. He wore the same coat as the evening before, and he moved with the same unhurried ease, but something about the way he carried it was different this morning, not diminished, not softened, but quieter. He stopped inside the corridor and looked at Mrs. Orving, and she had just enough time to set her inventory board down before he said, "The wine steward, the new one, is she here?" "I'll find her," Mrs. Orving said. Ilva was in the cellar, restoring the previous evening's bottles to their proper positions. She came up into the corridor with a small notebook in her hand and a look that was neither startled nor rehearsed. The same composed and steady face Mrs. Orving had come to recognize as simply how Ilva met things. She stopped when she saw VAR. She did not step back. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Mrs. Orving, who had known this man across 11 dinners and a great many small professional transactions, had never seen him look at a person quite this way, not with the watchful, assessing attention he brought to most interactions, but with something that had no calculation in it at all. "What is your name?" he said. "Ilva," she said. He nodded once, as though confirming something he had already suspected. "The analysis came back this morning," he said. "Early. I came to tell you myself." He said what it was, plainly, without softening. He said what the concentration would have produced, and across what interval, and that it would not have been attributed to the wine. He said all of this in the tone of a man who believed she was owed the full truth of what she had stopped. Ilva listened. She did not look away, and she did not reach for anything to say. When he had finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I was glad I saw it in time." "So am I," he said. It was very simple. The two words did not ask for anything in return. Then he said, "I would like to offer you a position. Not here, though I have no objection to Hartwell House if you prefer it. What I mean is a position with my household directly. An official one with a proper salary and a proper title and whatever terms you require." He paused. "You would not be obligated to accept. I want to be clear about that." Ilva considered this for a moment in the way she seemed to consider most things, without performance, without false speed. "What would the work involve?" she said. He told her. He was specific. Mrs. Orving, who had not moved from her position near the inventory board and who had, she would admit later, entirely forgotten the inventory, listened to the two of them negotiate the outline of a professional arrangement in the plain, practical language of two people who respected each other's intelligence. There were no extravagant gestures. There were no declarations. There was a feared man in a service corridor explaining, with patient precision, what he was offering and why, and a young woman in a cellar apron asking the questions she needed answered before she could give him an honest answer. When they had finished, Ilva said, "I would need a week to give you a proper answer." "Take it," he said. "And I would want to keep the cellar work, whatever the position becomes." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the thing that lives in the same neighborhood. "That," he said, "I can arrange." He thanked her then, simply, directly, without the ornamental language that powerful men sometimes use when they are performing gratitude rather than feeling it. He shook her hand. He nodded once to Mrs. Orving, who nodded back. And then he went back out the way he had come, through the narrow door at the corridor's end, into the east garden, and was gone. The corridor was very quiet for a moment. Ilva looked down at the notebook she was still holding. She smoothed the cover with her thumb, the same methodical, unhurried gesture she brought to everything, and looked up at Mrs. Orving with an expression that was not quite asking for anything, and not quite sure what to do with what had just happened. "Well," said Mrs. Orving. "Yes," said Ilva. Mrs. Orving picked up her inventory board. She looked at the first line for a moment without reading it, and then she set it down again. In 23 years, she had seen many things pass through Hartwell House, great dinners and small ones, arguments and reconciliations, alliances made and unmade over a single meal. She had watched powerful men conduct the business of their lives across tables, where the real transactions were always invisible to anyone who did not know how to look. She had learned to read rooms, and to read the people in them, and to keep her own counsel about what she found. She had never, before this morning, seen Domnikovar come through a staff door. She had never seen him thank a person the way he had just thanked Ilva, without the weight of obligation in it, without the implicit expectation of performance. Simply, "You did something that mattered, and I came to tell you myself, and here is what I am able to offer in return." She thought about the folded card, 4 words in a clear, unhurried hand. 3 weeks on the job, no one watching, no certainty of what would follow, and Ilva had acted anyway. Because it was the right thing to do, and she had seen what needed seeing, and that had been enough reason. Mrs. Orvin made a note in the margin of her inventory, not about the stock and not about the evening, and then she closed the board. Some mornings, she thought, left a mark on you that the ordinary ones did not. This was one of them,